association with Irish Whiskey Magazine. So I'll explain the tie in a few minutes, it'll become evident. But just kicking off with the news this week, and we'll talk about what's happened during the week. So, first things first, Killarney Distilling Company has laid ground and is making progress to opening the first distillery to be present in Killarney and expected to open in summer 2021. So exciting times down there. You can see that the diggers are down. I think there's over 50 diggers there, and you can see here it's actually going to be a magnificent distillery. Great for tourism, great for Killarney, great for the southwest. Not to be outdone, down in the southwest, the Kinsale Spirit Company has launched Red Earl, part of their Battle of Kinsale series. It's €40 whiskey, a blend at 40%, and it's available from their website, kinsalespirits.com. And then Diageo have announced the first non-plastic recyclable paper bottle, and they're planning on going into trials with this next year. So that'll be interesting to see who follows suit, part of the sustainability and responsibility initiatives from them. So the tie will become evident now. John,
How are
good
you?
evening.
Good
How
evening to
are
you.
you?
I'm good.
Very, very nice to have you on the show.
Pleasure.
Delighted. You've always been a great supporter of ours and of the industry. And of course, I remember you wrote the first forward in our magazine as well. So thank you for that. Look, it's delighted to have you here. How have you been keeping personally
Good.
with all this?
Surprisingly good. I wasn't hurt as much by the lockdown because we continued to distill all the way through, and so it meant I had somewhere to go. I spent maybe a week or 10 days kind of in the house, and that was enough. It certainly was
Yeah.
enough for my wife, so it was good.
Yeah, you're known to be hard working. You certainly, I don't think, sit home comfortably for very long.
No,
So,
no, no.
I mean, obviously the travel aspect, you do travel quite a bit as well.
I
Has
used
that
to
been?
travel a horrendous amount, absolutely horrendous amount, because I think many of you will know that apart from the whiskey, I'm involved in these exploration ventures in different parts of the world. So,
Yes.
uh, at my worst, which is probably about 30 years ago now, for most people, that's a horrendous number. I probably traveled outside the country maybe 30 to 40 weeks a year. I
Right.
don't miss that now, and I've been cutting back anyway for obvious reasons that should be clear to anybody looking at me. And so I will do less, and there will be less travel. I'll still do a bit.
Yeah. I mean, you do have a tremendous energy, John. What keeps you going? I mean, you could have retired, I'm sure, by now, taking it easy, put your feet up, and chilled. But you keep pursuing new activities, new projects, and
Why would I? Firstly, I'm blessed. I'm blessed, as you say, that I've always had energy. Thank God for that. I'm
yeah,
also blessed with good health, which is the second thing. And uh, I also have never understood why anybody would stop work to do what? I don't play golf. I
yeah,
don't have a boat. I don't do horse racing. I'm also very lucky that some of the things I do are very interesting, and I get the opportunities to look at new things. I'm just very lucky that way, and it's really luck.
yeah. And has it always been that way with you, John? Have you always had that energy and inquisitiveness and desire to try new things?
Yes, it's as simple as that. I um, I think it's fairly evident to me anyway that if there are people who have this gene or desire or bent that they're going to try and create things, it's obvious fairly young. I
Yeah,
think you see it. And it's a question of if you're developing guys who create enterprises or girls. So I'm not being anyway, but all you have to do is to encourage that. So from as a child, it would have been obvious. Yeah.
yeah. And you were that way inclined as a
Yeah.
child, were you? Do you want to take us back to where it all started, where you were born, and I suppose going up to when you went to university and over to the States and back? Because they were transformative years, I'd imagine, the ones in the States.
Yeah, I think obviously we're going to be here and it's going to be a very long night. I was born about 3 miles from where I'm sitting, so we haven't got very far. And indeed, the last 4 generations of Teelings have come 4 miles, so we haven't been that successful. We're north side Dubliners. Grew up, I was born in Marino and lived there till I was 8, and I moved to Clontarf, and I'm still in Clontarf. Not the same house, but in the same area, and all my family are here. Jack and Stephen, whom many of you will know, and my daughter Emma, we all live in the same area. And my brother, in fact, on Seafield Road in Clontarf, there are 5 Teelings, soon to be 6. Okay. That can be good and bad. Went to school in Joey's, a Christian Brothers school at primary school in Fairview. And good school, tough school. And did okay in it, went to secondary school there, did well in the leaving, got a university scholarship, which makes a big difference out of that. The big difference was that made that was my father died when I was 14, and I was the eldest of 4. My mother was a 37-year-old widow. So as some of you, I hope not many of you know, this means you have to step up to the plate. What can you do? You have to help to run the family. That was transformative. Went to do a BCom because there was a tiny family business that I was kind of running at 14 or 15, which was very interesting, very small, a couple of thousand, 4,000.
What was it, John?
There were 2. My mother, we had a Royal Ivor life assurance commission agency business where you collected money. And my father had set up a business of giving notes originally. Now, only Dublin people are going to understand this, so the rest of you will be lost. Is what would happen, it was poor area, you worked in poor areas, people hadn't money to buy, say, a bag of coal, or they hadn't money to get a First Communion dress. And my father represented companies, and you would give a note so you could go into these places, get your bag of coal or get your dress, and he would collect the payment of that by the week. And that led to the development of a tiny money lending business, a very small one, that ran until 1985. So I ran that from, at the time I was just 15, until I went to the States, and then my brother took over, and the next brother took over after him. My mother tried to work with him, but my mother was from Wexford and didn't have the benefit of education, as most people wouldn't have then. So that was important. Very good. I was, again, blessed and lucky to be working with the working class people of Dublin. Dublin in the beginning of the 60s wasn't a wealthy place, but I had nothing but help from them. They would support, a young family, and I have great respect and regards for them. It worked out later. My brother became a doctor on the north side, and many of the people we had worked with then, their children, in fact, went to him. So I went to do a BCom. It suited me perfectly.
I mean, is that where you got your business acumen, was from running that business, or you just had it?
I was always going to be a businessman, no doubt. There was never any doubt about that.
You knew from a young age, yeah.
Commerce was a means to an end. Now, I also did economics in first year, as you could do at that time, and I didn't do well in a thing called baby Latin at the end of first year arts, which was economics and geography. So I focused on commerce, did well in it, got, this will sound pompous, and I apologize in advance. So I got postgraduate scholarship in UCD to do a master's. It was a fellowship, and that in turn led to a fellowship to go to Wharton, the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia, to do an MBA. Okay. That was transformative. I had come, anybody my age watching, and there will be very few of you, would know that we were in UCD. UCD was in Earlsford Terrace. Earlsford Terrace was run down, fabulous place, great place, but run down. The library was hardly existent. There'd be one copy of a book. Get sent to the reading. The first person probably tore the pages out or hid the book. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, where it was open shelf libraries, dozens, if not scores of copies of books. I thought I died and gone to heaven.
Yeah. So that was in 70s, late 60s, early 70s?
60, 66, 67, 67 and 68, basically. And
that would have been a big deal back then to make that trip and go out there and study, wouldn't it?
It was a huge deal. Yeah, I mean, there'd only been one or two before me. It was the Fellowship of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick, would you believe, which was established to bring people out. It was one of the oldest organizations in the States, still going strong. I was due to address their annual conference in March of this year until it was postponed. Their annual gala dinner, not a conference. Very powerful in Philadelphia. It funded the scholarship for 2 years.
Okay.
And I did well there. You would expect me. I had a BCom and I had a Masters of Economics before I went, and
Yeah.
to do basic courses again, I was expected to do well. While I was there, um, UCD came calling. Literally, it was great for my ego.
Right.
One day, the then professor of business administration knocked on my door and asked would I like to come back to UCD, and that had prestige then, which it probably hasn't got now.
Yeah.
And I accepted.
And were you ever tempted to stay in academia?
I stayed until, I stayed over 20 years.
Right.
I was a full-time academic. I only finished in 1988, and probably would have stayed longer, though my time was up. What had happened was I went in there and got great support from the faculty, because I was very young when I started to lecture. I was 21, and they agreed that I should try and develop my business experience. I mean, it's like medicine or it's like law. You need to practice what you're preaching. I really believe that most strongly.
You can't learn football from a book.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the reasons that I did well out of it was over the years, I would be able to talk to my first year classes about things I was doing.
Yes.
And I will notice you and I wear a suit. One of the things I learned later is you always appear in front of business students with a suit, a shirt, and a tie. Always.
I actually don't know of any occasion that I haven't seen you wearing a tie and a jacket.
You
So,
won't. Any formal or semi-formal occasion, if you're going to teach business, you better look like a businessman. Now, maybe in 2020, it's a bit different, but certainly it wasn't. So I taught in UCD after a year. This is a long waffle, I apologize. After a year, people were looking for somebody to do financial analysis for the nascent mining industry in Ireland. The company that controlled it, which was Northgate,
right.
didn't have anybody. The banks in Canada, they wanted to fund the mine, and they wanted somebody to do spreadsheet analysis and a thing called discounted cash flow. When I came back I was back at the end of 68. This was 1969. And nobody in Ireland could do discounted cash flows at that time except me, because I learned it at Wharton. And now I'm telling you, primary school kids do it on a Hewlett Packard, but there were no Hewlett Packards. There were no electronic computers or anything like that then. So you were doing it by hand or by the old-fashioned calculator, click, click thing. So I took a job with Northgate as a consultant in the very office I am now. I took that job in September 1969. I'm in the same room 51 years later. And because I'm from...
You're used to it now.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I'm very comfortable in this chair. If you could see around the office, and I won't show you, you'll see 1969 filing cabinets and bookshelves, and probably some books from 1969. So that led me to that. I went back to Harvard to do a doctorate. That was a very difficult decision. For every reason, I was 25. I was doing well. I had a couple of jobs. I was consulting. I had money. I had a girlfriend who I'd been going out with for years. So I got engaged before I went back that time. We got married at the end of my first year at Harvard. So that took me through. I came back after 3 years there, not finished the thesis. It took me a couple of years. I apologize, I don't know what that is. It took me 2 years to finish the thesis, which I didn't finish till 75.
Yeah.
So that was that part of it.
So, I mean, you went to Harvard. It wasn't a necessity by any means that you did go. What was it that drove you or made you go?
If I've worried and thought about that question over the years, I think if you're very lucky to be good at anything, you owe it to yourself to see how far you can go. Okay. If you have any kind of a talent or an ability, I really believe you should push that. And I was blessed while I was in UCD to have very bright students, and I would have really put pressure on them to really go as far as they can academically, just to see are you good enough. And that was part of it. The second thing was, if I was ever going to stay an academic, you needed a doctorate. And I had a fabulous support from UCD, financial, even though I was on a Ford Fellowship, so I didn't need money, as well as they kept the job for me all the time. And very good support. So that was correct. You wanted a highly qualified teaching staff if you were going to try and be a good business school. So that was important. That was a great experience. It took a long time. 23, 24. So I was 28 when I finished. So I'd been a student from the time I was 4. 24 years a student. That's a long time.
It is a long time, but I
It
mean,
is.
you met some. Sorry, well, sorry. Was it about the same time that the Vietnam protests were on in that
Oh,
time in
big
the
time, big time. It was a very difficult time to be in America, in
Yeah,
that in '67 and '68 you had the draft, and you had not alone did you have the war, the start of the street protests against Vietnam, but you also had very strong racial riots at that time in the States, particularly in Philadelphia. Boston was much more relaxed. Cambridge outside of Boston was a lot easier. That didn't happen from 70 to 75. But 67 and 68 were difficult times in the States. They were starting to draft graduate students, so people were scared out of their minds. And they knew full well that the people going to Vietnam, they tended to send young, if you got into the officer corps, they sent you there at 19, and they had a very short life expectancy in Vietnam at that time.
yeah,
So it was a very difficult time in America. Even in the early 70s, then they lacked self assurance. The Vietnam War, I think, left a lasting impression on America, which took them maybe 25, 30 years to get over until they re-established their normal swagger, which they've had for the last few years.
yeah. But I'm sure it was an eye opener for you and an experience.
Oh, it's
I mean,
fabulous.
that
Anybody who's
very
been,
few would have gone.
yeah, well, you're blessed. I mean, it was 2 Ivy Leagues. I was beyond blessed. Wonderful facilities, brilliant teachers, great students,
Yeah,
very good experience. Was I, in terms of financial things, was I right to do the doctorate? Don't know. I
yeah.
still don't know
Well,
after
it's
all these
worked
years.
out okay. I think it's worked out
Yeah,
okay for you.
I think the MBA was kind of the icing on the cake. What skills I have, I
Yes,
think I learned there really.
and you did teach until, as you were saying, the mid '80s. Just out of curiosity for myself, I suppose, how do you see the standards have fared over the last 10 years? Do you think they've stayed high, and where does Ireland rate in terms of the academic business side?
Ireland cannot but continue to fall down the
Yeah,
ranking for a number of reasons, but particularly the Eastern universities have large sums of money, as do the Middle East universities.
yeah,
And
yeah.
universities depend on the quality of the staff, the quality of the students, and the research you're doing. And if you can buy all of that, which they simply do,
Yes,
then they're going to outrank you. I I suspect I'm not biased. Now, my wife still is above the university. My sister's just finished as professor of medicine in Trinity. My son-in-law is professor, and my daughter, as you know, is on the governing body at UCD. So I'm slightly biased.
yeah,
I think maybe a lot biased. I think Irish universities are extremely good. I really do. By the way, I think our primary and secondary education is the reason for that. I think that's top class, particularly the primary education where you learn the 3 hours. We can all read, write, and spell. Thank God for that.
yeah,
And most countries, and you meet the international students, they can't.
yeah.
They don't do those things
Really,
very well.
yeah,
Yeah, reading, writing, and arithmetic is what I meant to say, not spelling. Yeah, and that's so. I think it's very good. I think the staff are good. It's got much bigger now, as I said. UCD had 3,000 students when I was there. I think it's over 20,000 now. Hard to keep the standards when it's that big, and they have not been getting that much financial support. So it's a problem for them. But the schools are very good. The university, even I was going to say even, and I don't mean that. The non-traditional universities, some of them are really very good. I like the quality of third level
it's
art.
trying to attract good teachers, like you say, and keep them here rather than go abroad. Just
Well,
incidentally,
no harm to go abroad and come back.
yeah, absolutely. Just if people have any questions they'd like to put to John, if you can just put them in the comments and we'll address them. But as it happens, one thing I want to ask you is, it was a perchance meeting with Willie MacArthur in Boston that you were developing the idea of setting up a distillery, and I believe you were doing some research on Irish whiskey at the time.
No, Willie was more than me. I tell you what happened on that. Um, my research interests were on industrial development policy,
Yeah.
how to develop a country like this, or in old people in UCD would know it as national economics.
It's okay.
James
So
Newman.
macro.
Yeah, so it we part of the requirements for the doctorate at Harvard was that you'd write a couple of case studies, and like most people, nobody knew what to write on. One of my professors was Professor of Agricultural Economics, Harry Hansen, and he suggested I do it on Irish whiskey. Now, I knew nothing whatsoever or less than Irish whiskey. So I did a case study on the marketing of Irish whiskey in the States, which was absolutely abysmal. It was frightening. It was a total failure, not even a partial failure, a total failure. And that kind of concerned me because I knew enough to know that whiskey is made from thyme, air, water, and grain. Yeah. Nothing else. Absolutely nothing else. And we had thyme, we had air, we had very good water, and we had good grain. So I couldn't understand this. And I also saw when I was looking at it that we had fallen from 60% of the industry to 2% of the world's whiskey to 2%. So I did a second case study on the background of this, and that reason led to the fact that I met. There was a bar halfway between Harvard and MIT called the Plough and Stars. Know that? Still there to this day.
And a plaque in the bar, I believe.
There's a plaque on the wall, saying this is the foundation of modern Irish whiskey. Anyway, Willie would go there and I'd go there, and as much to meet other Irish students, or mainly students that were there, not many. And it was very obvious to me. I remember exactly when we decided this, that, here was an industry where we had a natural advantage, absolutely advantage, and we'd managed to screw it up. And to me, the reasons were very obvious. So I remember talking to Willie and saying, look, we could do better than this. We could set up a whiskey industry. At that stage, 1970, it was just becoming a full monopoly. It was Bushman's.
73, I think it became the full monopoly.
Bushman's became a total monopoly. At that stage, it was a monopoly in the Republic, and doing really badly. So I saw an opportunity in it. Now, it took a little while, like 16 years before we were able to do anything. In the meantime, I'd been working with Willie on other projects.
Yeah, of course. So between the 70s and 85, you were involved in the mining, oil, teaching, and then 85 came about and the Cooley distillery came up. And that was one of the 4 government plants producing ethanol, alcohol, methanol. But they were a dismal failure. I mean, could you tell us why they were a failure?
I say they were a dismal failure. There were 4 of them. They were put into impoverished areas, really impoverished areas of the country. Yeah. And in the case of the Cooley Peninsula, and I would suspect in those in Mayo and probably in Donegal, the potato crop was still the dominant crop, and they had potato blight. So they weren't allowing people to sell the potatoes or to take them from the area. So they're completely impoverished. So the government set up this and said that, look, you're going to make methanol from potatoes, and we're going to pass a rule that 25% of all the petrol in the country has to contain methanol. Now, I'm not sure, was it efficient? Probably not. But given the alternative, the benefit to these peninsula areas of very impoverished rural parts of the country, I think were very substantial. So I'm not sure. I'm not a great believer in state enterprise, but some of them in Ireland weren't that bad. I think Board of Money did a fabulous job for maybe 50 years. And so by 1986, it had gone. The world had moved on from it, and they were losing money heavily. Though the Cooley one had actually turned to making good quality alcohol for the likes of Smirnoff and Bailey's at that time by importing molasses through Green Ore. So their quality was okay. And so the government one night closed it all. This was, as you say, in 85. It lay there for about a year. I looked at it in 86. I didn't know it was for sale. I happened to see it and again on an airplane, an ad in a paper, thought I should buy it. And the reason is very, very simple. And in fact, this explains the Great Northern Distillery too. And I hope I can say it very simply. 85% of all whiskey is blended. 15% is malt, 85% is grain whiskey made in columns. The only column distillery in Ireland was Irish Distillers. And this is where Willie comes back into the picture. They were not going to sell to anybody else. So if you were going to set up a distillery, in fact, you had to set up 2, pot stills and column stills. And I saw that the columns in Cooley or Chemical Chornta could be used to make grain whiskey. And
so did they need much modification, or were they?
More than I'd hoped. because of course, great being a finance guy, I didn't know my ass from my elbow in terms of either engineering or distilling. And we had problems with it. They didn't work right in the beginning. We had the temperatures wrong. And as anybody in the business knows, if you get the temperatures wrong, you lose a lot of the stuff. The yield is appalling. So we did that. And then again, we said, look, we're here. We have to have both whiskies. Having grain whiskey is not going to go anywhere. So we need malt as well. And so we found some pots up in Comber in Northern Ireland. And we bought them, and they fitted perfectly into the existing plant, which had been designed and built by the Czechs in 1935. The Cooley Peninsula in 1935 wasn't a place to send in English contractors. No, it was not. So they used Czech contractors, and they did wonderful tolerances, wonderful work. But it was a steel structure, so not easy to adapt. If you drive up there now on your way to Carlingford, you will see it. It's a big, very Germanic-looking building, excellent building. We got stuff in there, and we started. It took us about 18 months. Didn't have too much trouble financing it at that time because I'd been successful with the mineral companies, the resource companies at that time.
Yeah. And are you still involved in the mineral companies?
Oh yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I'm involved in 4 listed companies and 1 unlisted. We have 2 in the hydrocarbon business. One is called Petrel, which has been very active in the last 12 months. It is involved in Irish offshore exploration in the Atlantic, and that's been blown apart. It was involved in Iraq, where we did very well under Saddam, and we stayed there till 2007 and did quite well. And then kind of the coalition wasn't terribly happy with small. Basically, Petrel is Irish. It's Irish registered. We sold out, got our money back. We have a company called Clontarf Energy, which had been in Bolivia in the 80s, now has interests in Ghana, probably re-establishing its interests in Bolivia, lithium and possibly hydrocarbons.
And then the diamond side of the business?
The diamond came about, we went, our first venture was a company called African Gold in Zimbabwe, and did all right, not well, struggled with Zimbabwe falling apart by 2000. So we decided we'd move everything across the border into Botswana, literally across the border, same geology around Francistown. Went to have a look at it and found that the opportunities in gold there weren't as good as the ones I had in Zimbabwe. But the 2 guys who were trying to sell me the gold had a couple of diamond licenses, and that led to the establishment of Botswana diamonds. Not Botswana, I should say, African diamonds. What I could do then, and still can, is if you have an idea, any kind of an idea, that I think I like and I think I can sell, I will take that, I will wrap a company around it. I will raise the initial financing for the company, give you a stake in it, and if you're good enough, you can run it, or if you want to. And then we see where it goes from there. So it's basically angel investing. It's high risk, early stage speculation. African Diamonds was really successful in that we found what became the Lucara mine, still is the Lucara mine, AK6 in November 2004, a beautiful diamond mine in Botswana. That was taken off us, for a price, obviously, in 2011.
But so there's obviously a huge difference between these kind of businesses, okay, maybe not so much oil, but certainly mining and distilling, hugely different. Are there any common strands between them in terms of running the business? Are the principles the same?
I think the principles of startup companies are all the same, and I'm not so sure there's an awful lot of difference between that and, say, basic pharmaceutical R&D or medtech or any of those things. Is, as I said to you there, establishing a business requires a vision or an idea.
Yeah.
It requires the ability to put together the resources, and those resources are 3 things. They are the money, which everybody talks about.
Yeah.
But it's also the people, the structure, the skills, and it involves the technology, which you can buy, borrow, beg, anyway, do whatever you can to get the technology. Then there's can the principals take the risk of the uncertainty? Can you imagine this year, nobody saw what that happened.
We're talking about taxes and embargoes and things like that.
Yeah, okay, you can handle those, but nobody saw the virus. Nobody. How could you possibly? And see what's happened. And God help, I was just listening before I came down here this evening. The pubs are closed for another 3 weeks. It's all right for the civil servants and for the medics to say that, But the poor
Yeah.
publicans do have to pay things, maybe not wages. They will have lost all of their equity. Most of them will lose all of the equity in the business, which is awful. But
Yeah.
look, that's the ability to take the risk. And finally, like any new businesses, it's have you got the energy? You've mentioned this before, the energy and the determination to see it and to change it and to work with it. So that's the common thread. Any startup business requires those four things.
Yeah.
Those
So
four.
if we look at Cooley, then did that emerge and develop as you had initially foreseen?
No, it hasn't.
Oh,
I don't know. Is your own business going to emerge exactly as you foresee? No.
I hope not.
Some did. Some did.
Yeah.
Very rarely. A fabulous general said that the most best planned war plans, battle plans, do not survive the first skirmish.
Okay.
That's so true.
Yeah. Yeah.
But we had an idea, and the whiskey that was being made in Ireland in the 70s was made in pots, and it was heavy. Now, don't get me wrong, it had a heavy flavour, and it was still 40%. And one of the problems in the research was that people said, oh my God, Irish whiskey, that's very strong and will give you a hangover. And they wouldn't taste it, whereas Scotch was much lighter because it had far more grain whiskey in it. And that the Irish just never adapted to the grain technology. They just refused the big Dublin distilleries, who now have put forward the fact that they were the Irish industry. They were for a while in the 19th century, but they lost their dominance by 1870, 1880, and it had moved to Belfast. They refused to put in the columns, so the whiskey was heavier. And they didn't change that until the 1950s, at which stage the war was lost. Never mind the battle, the war was lost. So I, in 1970, wrote a blueprint for this, and it was a little blueprint. It wasn't hundreds of pages, that said we would make whiskies that people wanted. And at that stage, the emerging markets were Southern Europe and Japan. Now, this was 1970. And we would make a light whiskey like J&B or Ballantine's that young people would like. And we would make a light malt. Now, again, most of you at this stage know, but they didn't then, that the Irish distillers never made malt. I mean, only Bushmills made single malt. And so as such, Bushmills at that stage wasn't part of Irish distillers.
And also pulled out of the IDG group at that point, had it?
Yeah, and it was very small. Bushmills was, family run and not great and losing money all the time. It supposedly never made money from 1876 until then. So the plan was to make a malt that was light like Glenfiddich, entry-level malt, which subsequently became Tyrconnell, and to make a light whiskey, which subsequently became Kilbeggan. Now, I'm not so sure the world hasn't moved towards us 50 years later, that I still think the best whiskies that you make are whiskies that people will drink, no fancy hang-ups that will make what's good. You make what people want to drink. And young people don't want very heavy whiskies, except the specialist ones that do.
Yeah. So, I mean, you've got classic brands. So you mentioned Tyrconnell, Kilbeggan. Connemara was a game changer. Green Ore was a game changer. Cassidy's, and then you did a lot of bottling for supermarkets, Dunn's, Marks and Spencer's, and other third parties.
That was a failure. And I say it was a failure. That was how the strategy had to change. The original strategy was we would sell brands because that's where the margins are, but we didn't. And indeed, the problem with Cooley, after 25 years, by 2010, no matter what we did, we could not get route to market, which means we couldn't get it on the shelf.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get it off the shelf, even if we did, because the industry, whiskey, is what we call an oligopoly. It's a brand-intensive, marketing-intensive oligopoly. So you have to play with 4 or 5 big boys who control the distribution.
Yeah.
And the only way to get anywhere will be to work with them. Now, in the 80s and the 90s, Irish whiskey was still dying. It didn't change until about 2001, maybe around that time. So we tried very hard, but we had whiskey. We had no revenue, not a good thing. And we had... So we changed very quickly. We said, look, we're not very good at this, at marketing. We're not able to do it. So we went to the retail own label, the Tesco's, the Marks and Spencer's, the Carrefour's, and they would put it on the shelf as long as it was cheap. We made good money because we were the only supplier of own labels, so we got a good price.
Yeah.
We were getting at the time about 3 times the own label price of Scotch in the likes of Marks and Spencer's.
Okay.
So that worked. And then we did a small amount of bulk. We supplied a couple of people who wanted bulk whiskey that they would do themselves. Now, Great Northern is different. The majority of our customers now have their own brands. So I'm doing almost no retail owned label, almost none.
There's a question in actually about that from Charlie McGrippin.
Hello, Charlie. I know Charlie. I do.
He says, now that you're using the Burke's name, do you intend to use the Skylark trademark?
I'll have to take a while to explain that to you. Skylark was a brand that the old Dundalk distillery, Malcolm Brown, had, and they made it. It wasn't necessarily on whiskey. I can't remember what was on. It could have been on yeast or something like that. So we re-registered. It's nice, and we were going to do it as a putching or a gin, and then Burke's was taken up because it was a fabulous Irish whiskey brand, which Charlie would certainly know. In fact, Charlie supplied me with some of the stuff, ads going back to 1870, wonderful things.
Yeah.
Where we stand right now, and your timing is very good, in that we had a board meeting on Monday, and we decided that what we were going to do, Great Northern is going to make whiskey, bulk whiskey. That's what we're going to do, nothing else. It's the simplest mission. Any of you who've ever been to a business school knows it's good to have a mission statement. Our mission statement is we make whiskey. Don't do anything else. Don't bottle, don't do brands at this stage. So we'll use Burke's. When we have places in Asia, we'll say, look, this is what you can have. Here's the label, and here's what it's made up. So we'd have a 3, a 5, a 10, and an 18-year-old. There are no plans for Skylark. The other brand that we would have, which will be an entry-level one, will be Castletown, which was the old name for Dundalk 1,000 years ago.
Okay. Just for people that aren't familiar with the Cooley distillery, there's a picture of it there.
Yeah,
not the most elegant of buildings, I have to say.
Absolutely, a good Germanic design and implementation, but a very good building.
And then in a showing one of the brands, and then the wider range of brands. So like I said, Tyrconnell, Connemara, Kilbeggan, Locks, and Cassidy's, and I know there are others as well.
Cassidy's is owned by Marks and Spencer's. I'd like to have that brand back, but they own the brand as distinct from us supplying it to them. If I could take a minute, you have that there. Look at Connemara. Wonderful story.
Yes.
Oh, yeah, it's a great story.
So, yeah, I mean, I had heard that Connemara was possibly the one that really put Cooley on the map.
Possibly. But firstly, let me tell you where it came from. I didn't know anything about it, neither did the board. In 1991, David Hines and Brian Quinn decided between them that they would distill peated malt for the Japanese market, because the Japanese like whiskey in a highball. They like a long whiskey with plenty in it. So if you put something, a nice, delicate, blended whiskey, there'd be no taste left, and that they might like the peated. Didn't bother telling the board, but don't worry about things like that. And 4 years later, we had this peated malt, and we hadn't got much further than France, never mind to Japan. So what the hell were we going to do with it? So I had a group of young European orientation, EOPs, young marketing graduates working for it. So on a Friday afternoon, following good, in search of excellent proposals from Peters and Waterman, I said, get into this room, just down the road from where I'm sitting now, 174. There's the whiskey. Come out and tell us what to do. Do not come out until you tell us what to do with it. 4 hours later, they came out with Connemara in name and they thought this would be good for France, because the most popular drinking song in France is Connemara.
Connemara, yeah.
Yeah. And also, they had it in a dark brown bottle, a green bottle, because green supplies strength and colour. Yeah. They had that dump shape on it because it was like Chivas Regal, exactly.
Yeah.
And then they had a picture of Connemara, and it hasn't changed very much. Now, there was war in many places because Irish distillers said that Irish whiskey was never peated. There's still an ongoing battle about this, which is nonsense. Because, and Charlie knows this, if you're listening, Charlie, your data again, that how did you dry malt in Ireland? Particularly if you went on the coast, this is your own article, which is on the table here. You use peat.
Yeah.
And in fact, I have evidence from Bushmills that they actually increased the percentage of peach in Bushmills till 1988. So anyway, we kind of won that battle, but it's proven to be the most successful product for Cooley Distillery.
Yeah.
And it's very good. David Hines makes very good whiskies.
So David Hines is your managing director at Cooley, or is
Yeah, and he's still with me. I mean,
still?
he's a shareholder of Great Northern. In fact, he's up there at the moment working on the. He's probably right there now,
Okay.
working on the pots. Some small changes on the pots. The green ore I think is fascinating, and I agree with you. What happened with the green ore was we were making grain whiskey and we were putting it into first use American bourbon barrels, whereas the tradition in Scotland is to use your poorest quality barrels because it's only going to be a base for a blend.
Yes.
They don't sell green ore. Now, we found out after about 4 or 5 or 6 years that our grain whiskey had a taste, which wasn't supposed to have a taste,
Yeah.
because it's hard to blend something that can have a taste. So, and the reason being that David had designed the columns with more copper in the plates in the columns,
Yes.
and that we were using first fill barrels from the States, never had Scotch, never had Irish or any whiskey in it before. So we were getting some of the flavor of bourbon and still some of the flavor of the wood.
Yeah.
And what you had was a very good light whiskey, a very good light whiskey. And that was green ore. And that is now taking off. And in fact, I would suspect in the next 20 years, maybe 30 years, that grain whiskey is going to be a big part of the development of Irish whiskey.
Yeah, I mean, I was very sad to see the brand disappear, Green Ore brand. I thought it was a lovely brand, and you know the selection. I am missing one of the Green Ore in my. I'm missing the Green Ore 10 cast string out of that Green Ore set. And
Don't look
the
at
funny
me.
thing is,
I probably have a case somewhere, but maybe not that particular one.
yeah, the funny thing is, Green Ore, where Teeling's warehouse are now, is where I actually did my final year project when it was Panpack Limited, and they were producing the bottles for Coca-Cola. So
In Green
small
Ore.
world.
It is a
Small
very
world.
small world. That was a lucky buy by the Hanlons.
Yes,
Because
the Hanlons, they were the transport company.
yeah, that's 200,000 square feet that was used to pack for, who was it, for Xerox? Wasn't it for
Yeah.
Xerox?
Yeah,
Yeah, and it didn't happen. And a great buy. So
yeah. I used to get a lift up in the Hanlon lorry because that's where I did my final year project, was with them in Panpack Limited in Green Ore. So that was, so Green Ore obviously hugely successful. Tyrconnell now making a strong comeback.
yes,
And as you said, grain whiskey, you've got some fabulous grain whiskey. And I think, you know, Noel Sweeney has to be given some credit as well for his work on the single grains.
oh yes, oh
He's
yeah, sure,
a fantastic one there in Powerscourt Distillery as well, the 10-year-old single grain. But what happened, and the company ran into difficulties with Cooley?
How often did it run?
Oh,
into
did it happen? Well, I'm referring more specifically to the time that the Monopoly Board refused IDG
They were
the
right.
ability to buy it.
That was a good decision. The difficulty with whiskey distilleries is no matter how successful you are, the more successful you are, the more money you need, because you're laying down whiskey at a huge amount. The amount of money going into working capital in Great Northern is over $250,000 a week,
Right.
extra every single week. And that'll be there for 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 years. I probably won't sleep tonight now, having said that. Now it's your fault for asking me. And we raised the first few million. Literally, few million was great in 1987, 88. And then we used the EIS as a turn, the BS at that time, and we raised another 7, all of which went into inventory. And then they stopped us using the EIS at the BS at that time. And we suddenly stopped money. So we had to stop distilling for a couple of years. And at that time, the friendly banks, I won't mention it, though, may they burn in hell, they decided to call the loans. And I was on holiday with my family, in Jack and Stephen, in Namibia, because we the company out there. I was given 24 hours to get back from Namibia. I managed to get a weekend into that, so I got back. And so to this day, I am grateful to Sean Fitzpatrick in Anglo-Irish. He took the loan. Now, he charged me a higher rate of interest,
Yeah.
And got personal guarantees and things like that, but he funded the money. Otherwise, we were bust. We struggled again a second time because we were always spending more because we didn't stop distilling except in 92-3. And it was hard to get back. And shareholders, I used to raise, these are people who had supported me in the exploration companies.
Yeah.
We were approached by Irish distillers who wanted to get rid of the competition. They hadn't worried about it, but suddenly we're selling mature whiskey. And we're developing brands like Great Northern, like Connemara, like Tyrconnell, none of which they had. And I don't know who that is.
I think that's a pretty nice comment.
Maybe I want to come back as you, but anyway, let's see. We reluctantly entered into negotiations. Now, Irish distillers in Ireland didn't want to deal with us, but the French company said, just get rid of them. Pernod said, get rid of them, get them off the map. And they made an offer that was a fair offer. I won't deny, I can't remember what it was, but it was probably, I should remember, maybe 28 million euro at the time. Yeah. This was in 93. And we decided we would take it. And it was immediately referred to the competition authority, which I thought was correct. And they rejected it. But that provoked, I think, I thought at the time they were right. We got a rejection from the competition authority on a Friday afternoon, and the board was meeting. Sure enough, got a phone call from our friendly banker on the Friday afternoon and said, any chance you could see us Monday morning? Love to have a little word with you. And we owed about 5.1 million at that time. So what we had to do over the weekend, we managed to get a value on the whiskey we had over the weekend with Heaven Hill in the US and Borco in Germany. And they agreed, each of them agreed to buy 5 years of whiskey in the form of a loan of what they would expect to sell. And so every year when they sold the whiskey, they added another bit to it. So it was effectively a loan. Yeah. About 1 million each, those two. So I'm grateful to both those companies to this day. And three of us had to find €500,000 each over the weekend. So on the Monday morning, I went in and slapped down, I remember it quite well, €3.5 million to the bank. Right. That's what kept us alive. Right. That's stressful.
Typical times.
Oh, yeah. And we never got really much beyond that. Now, from about 97 on, we were covering our costs and making a little bit of money, but nothing serious. But what we didn't see at all, and we should be shot, was tastes change, and young people in America started to buy Irish whiskey. Now, I like, if I'm feeling good for myself and sucking thumbs, trying to go to sleep at night, as you can say, when I went firstly to Binny's, in some of you will know Binny's, the biggest retailer of whiskey in the world at that time in Chicago, great company. The guy at the time, who's still, Steve something, he's still alive, brought me down the aisles, and there was a whole aisle of scotch, maybe 400 or 500 brands of scotch, big long aisle in Binny's. At the end of it, there was a bottle of Bushmills and a bottle of Tullamore. No category of Irish. None, just two little bottles. Yeah. So we threw out these 4 or 5 brands and a couple of others. So by 1993 or 94 or 95, and then a little bit further on, there were maybe 10 or 15 brands of Irish, including single malt. Now, repeatedly, maybe, I'm sure some of the guys have heard this, there's no such thing as an Irish single malt, though it was the first malt. And we've had to argue with that. So if we created the category. Now, is that the reason why we're successful? You might think yes, because as you know, Irish whiskey or Scotch whiskey hasn't grown in the last 20 years. Blended Scotch hasn't grown at all, not in one bottle. The malt has, whereas Irish whiskey has gone up 6-fold. It's because it's a better product, it's a lighter product. So from 2001, young Americans started to drink brown spirits. They started to drink Jack Daniels in particular, yes. And American bourbons. And by about 2005, we were really on the ball. We suddenly noticed our sales were going up in America. So when I looked at whiskey in America in 1969, we were doing about 180,000 cases in the country. So 180,000, of which 60% was for Irish coffee. That was Tullamore Dew was Irish coffees. Bushmills was the only semblance of a brand. And you're talking about maybe couple of 100,000 cases at most. No, nothing like that, sure, maybe 60,000. And by the year 2000, it was about 380,000. That's all. It had gone from 180 to 380. And suddenly, by about 2005, we had noticed it was growing at a good bit, it was growing faster. And that rate of growth increased, and it's only very recently it may be slowing up. And by 2010, we had a fabulous problem. It was a wonderful problem. And Jack was running it at that stage, and Stephen was working on the marketing side. The problem we had was, if we grew more than the rate at which whiskey was maturing, we ran out of whiskey. You have to kind of figure that one out. Yeah. It's obvious if you've been living with it now. Some of you will have to go away and think about what I've just said. So if I was distilling at full capacity and was selling that, I just can't grow. Now, I wasn't anywhere near it selling. But by 2000, at the end of 2010, it was perfectly clear at the rate we were growing at, which was 30 or 40% a year, we were going to run out of whiskey in 2 or 2.5 years before any expansion could be mature whiskey. Sure. Lovely problem to have. So at that stage, we had still failed to gain traction in the markets. We just had not got onto the shelf in any significant fashion. Kilbeggan was making a go of it. Tullamore, Connemara, and Greener were small. You're like 10, 20,000, 30,000 case brands. That's not really brands. And so we kind of held a half of the beauty parade, and we had 5 companies trying to buy us in 2011. And we went with
the Jim Beam story, then, is it?
That was a whiskey company. That's why they'd 54% of the American bourbon market. And that's the reason we sold to Jim Beam. We thought they'd be good for the company, and they haven't been.
And so Jim Beam took it for a while, and then it went to Beam Suntory, I think 4 or 5 years later.
No, even quicker than that, yeah. Oh, yeah, maybe you're right. Yeah, maybe it's 4 or 5 years, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, are you happy you sold? I mean, you got a good price, I suppose, at the time. Was it 95 million?
95 million was about 23 times the 2010 EBITDA. Which seemed very good. But in fact, we were growing so fast that in 2011, it was about 15 times in reality, because the deal didn't get closed until September, October 2011. It didn't get finalized, closed in January 2012. Though there wasn't universal satisfaction on this. Jack and Steve, and Jack in particular, was very much against selling it, because he saw a future for himself and his brother. They were young. They were in their 30s. Stephen was very young, barely 30. And I had a couple of kind of shareholders who would like to have sold, who were getting old. I had, at that stage, I had shareholders who were 90. And so when I started in 1987, I was the young Turk. So by 2011, I was.
It just goes to show it's a long time play. 87 to 2011 is a long term on your investment.
That's successful at that stage. Now, they bought it. Beam bought it because they needed to fill out their production line so that it could be sold to somebody else. Their portfolio line, I should say. And they bought it. Matt Shattuck did a great job. And he expanded his portfolio. So Beam Suntory bought a complete range of whiskies other than their own whiskies, which were good.
So the age stock that you have, so you have some very old, mature stock that you have. I think some of it originated in Bushmill, some from Cooley. Was that all part of the deal there from the Cooley?
No, it was not. There was a deal with Beam. They agreed to give Jack and Stephen a supply of whiskey. I have to be careful here. That was difficult to implement. The best I can say about that, which led to some bad blood. Not big bad, but bad blood. I mean, what the directors agree and what the managers want to do is not always the same thing in companies. Some of you will know that. So they got some stock, some stock. And what happened very quickly after that was, it was very clear to me there was no non-competes. Firstly, non-competes under European law are difficult to do anyway now, but they didn't care about non-compete, because they said, look, if these guys set up distilleries, it's 6 or 7 or 10 years before they get certainly 7. So we did that. God was very good. Again, you have to be lucky. You've heard me say that. And again, Jack came into me one day, into this office. He had the office right here behind me, and said, there's somebody selling Irish whiskey. in the West Coast. And I said, don't be stupid, Jack. We were the only makers of bulk Irish. There's nobody selling Irish whiskey. He said, no, they are. So I said, go find out. And it was Bushmills. Diageo, in fact, not Bushmills.
Okay.
So we found out. And at that stage, I was at the early stages of looking at Harp. So I was dealing with Diageo.
Yes.
And we went to see them in Belfast. And what had happened there, and I thank God for accountants. I hope I'm not abusing any of you listening. The Bushmills had looked for an expansion in warehousing capacity. And as you know, large companies control their subsidiaries and divisions on the basis of financial ratios.
Yeah.
And the people abroad said, listen here, look what you have in that place. You don't need a new warehouse. Get rid of some of that inventory at the back that's been there for 25 years and you can't sell because it's not to spec, it's too small, this, that, and the other.
Yeah.
And we found out that it was there, went to see them. They were very good about it. And they said, this is what for sale. And in one of a good decision, just a good decision, Jack was with me. They said, yeah, we have this. So we said, how much have you got? He said, why? I said, we'll buy it all. And we bought all they had for sale, which was a lot.
Yeah.
Number of millions of litres. And we got a range of whiskies from 3 years up to 25, 27, 28. Now,
you showed me a 50-year-old sample at one point.
Was it the 50 or the 75?
Actually, it was the 75. I remember because it was a tiny.
Yeah. No, 75 is a series of completely different. That's stuff that I own.
Okay.
Because nobody else would buy it. No, it's whiskey that was in 9 barrels, 10 barrels. One happened to either get lost or break. And again, Kelly's used to be a wholesale operation, Morris Kelly's in Gardner Lane, and it moved out to the Nace Road.
Yeah.
And when they were moving out, they found at the back of the warehouse, as you always do, some old casks. Cooley didn't want to buy it and couldn't buy it, so I bought it. I bought the 10 casks for a good price for Morris. He was a good man. It's done. Tom Kelly lives in Clontarf. And I have it. We've only one that we've got. We've a whiskey, which I think a couple of bottles will become available shortly, but not necessarily for retail selling. I don't know what I'm minding it.
Mining.
I also have.
You're waiting for it to hit 100.
No, stopped because it loses strength. Yeah. The 75-year-old was distilled in Locks on the 14th of the 4th, 1944. And we took it out of wood and put it into tanks at 75. So that's not going to lose strength anymore.
One question here. Sorry, John.
41%.
41%. Okay. Yeah. Natural cask strength.
Fell down. It decreased from that. I have of the others. I've won about 38%. I have a very, very old Jameson. I have a B Daily barrel.
Okay. Yeah.
I have some parts, but some of them are not good. They don't. This is probably the only one that's good enough to be sold. I don't know. You tasted it. It wasn't the best whiskey you ever tasted.
Well, it was. Yeah, it was certainly woody.
Yes.
Certainly. John Marinan has a question here, John, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
He said, did IDL keep any of the Cooley stock after the attempted purchase?
Good question. My God, how can he even remember that? I can hardly remember that. They gave us 2 million and they took stock in return to keep going while they looked at acquiring us. God, I've forgotten that almost. Yeah. They kept it. I think they kept some of it for a very long time because, like other multinationals, they wouldn't put it into any of their products. Yeah. They sold some of it. I'm not sure that I may not have bought some of it back many years later. Actually, that's a good point. No, we didn't buy it back. Well, we couldn't.
Yeah.
After the deal fell apart, we wouldn't have had the money to repay it. They were fair enough on that.
How fierce was the rivalry back then, John?
Awful.
Really?
Awful. Now, before you start to do it, if you or anybody watching here, if you had a dominant position and suddenly these upstarts came in, the first thing you're going to do is rubbish the whiskey. Say that stuff will poison you. And in fact, in an immortal program on primetime, Richard Burrows said, we're going to pour this down the sink when we acquire it. This is not proper Irish whiskey and will damage the reputation. Okay. Anyway, instead of the fact that we won World Distillery of the Year and they never won it.
So yeah, you won that in 2010,
Well,
2009.
after winning 5 years in a row European Distillery, that's a tribute to David Hines and Noel Sweeney.
Yeah,
Absolutely nothing
I
to
know
do.
Noel Sweeney got Distiller of the Year twice, I think.
Yeah. David is he stands
Dave.
back. But the design of the distillery, everything about the distillery, as indeed Great Northern, is in fact is David.
Yeah. Right. And
So
you worked with some very talented people. I mean, you worked with David Hines, you worked with Noel Sweeney. Is it Johnny Hart had the Five Lamps?
Alex Chasko.
Alex Chosco, of course, as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's
Now, if you remember when I said that the job is your vision and then you must acquire the resources. Part of the resources is the people who's going to run it.
yeah.
And
Yeah.
again, I'm going to use the word lucky because I think I have been.
You have to have the manner to take the opportunity when it comes, though, as well.
Yes, but remember what you're doing, and some of you may be lucky to be involved in this. If I go decide, look, I want somebody like you, I want somebody who has certain skills that I need, I go along to you, and if I'm doing this thing, I really believe in it. And that should come out from my eyes. It should come over to you, and you're saying, listen here, this is just not going to be easy. There's going to be awful things. Things will go wrong that can't go wrong, technically, physically, financially. And you're going to have to muck in, do things exactly like Teeling Whiskey Company at the moment. This is a great learning experience for those guys. Because nobody has ever seen this before. What the hell do you do? You got to survive. That's what you have to do. So I've been lucky to get people not only in. I pay them, but I don't overpay them. I mean, I'm not a big one for giving away equity, but I support them and I leave them on their own. And that's I'd have to because I couldn't do it. But it's the same in the resource companies. I have good managers in the resource companies. David Horgan came to work with me some years ago. I have a guy called James Campbell who runs the Diamond Company. Patrick Cullen runs the Zinc Exploration Company.
Yeah, actually, I left out Ken McCabe reminded me as well. Jack O'Shea, of course, would have worked.
Jack worked. Would you believe he worked in Chemical Choranthon before?
Right, okay.
Yeah,
Okay,
before. So Jack lives down the road from me here. He's at Clontarf, Manhattan Road, just down the road here.
Well, we've a very unsung hero, I think, Jack O'Shea as well. Actually, he's really helped a lot of distilleries get going. Look, we'll jump onto the Great Northern Distillery, and I'll just show people, obviously, for those that haven't been up to Dundalk, and
not many have because we haven't opened it.
Yes, well, that's the old frontage there.
The brewmaster's house.
The brewmaster's house. I'm showing the pretty picture, John.
Yeah.
I didn't show all the industrial elements, but you had us up on a trip with the Irish Whiskey Society as well, which was fantastic. And here, the old harp. How much work was involved in transforming the? So, Brian Watts, your distiller.
Another great hire.
Yeah. The stills. There's 4 sites, aren't they? Here.
Not at all. They were the copper kettles. They were the kettles that were there, and we adapted them first to put the tops on by Macmillan. They weren't great, and we had to replace them with Forsyth.
So Forsyth.
The bottoms of them are the original copper kettles that would have been installed by Diageo.
Yeah. Here's some of the stories. So, John, this is the second largest distillery in Ireland. It's 5 million LPA liters of pure alcohol for malt.
10 million.
And 12 million of grain?
Sorry. Yeah, that's right. We're not anywhere near that yet. We will do this year. We'll do 10 million. We'll do 8 million or 250,000 grain and about 1 3/4 million malt this year.
Right. It's not an unsubstantial amount.
That's why I have a lot of working capital needs.
Yeah. I mean, what's the vision for... How did it come about and why did you just start to do it? And what did you learn from your experience at Cooley to bring and do differently in G&D?
A huge amount of learning, a huge amount.
Yeah.
The vision was very simple and very clear and very easy. And thank God that hasn't changed. All these small distilleries starting to be set up. The vast bulk of them are pot still.
Yeah.
And as such, they're going to make, if they try, they're not going to be able to sell everything they make as single malt or as pot still or as peated or whatever they're making. They're going to need grain whiskey. you had Cooley that wasn't really going to sell. It said it wouldn't sell any grain whiskey. It wouldn't sell any third-party whiskey at all. And Irish distillers weren't going to do it. So there was no, again, monopoly position was back again. You couldn't, these distilleries should never have been established unless they had a supply of grain whiskey. So I immediately set about looking for an operation to build a grain whiskey distillery. It was the furthest thing from my mind that I'd end up with the Harp site down the road from Cooley. I was playing around and looking at various ways to do it, because establishing a grain whiskey distillery is very expensive. It's not as cheap as pot stills at all, because it's basically a big industrial chemical complex. And then the three Diageo sites came: Kilkenny, Waterford, and Harp in Dundalk. And Harp was the biggest. I would have loved to have bought all three, but greed is a terrible thing. As it was, I bought two. I would have bought the Waterford site, but then I got gazumped by Mark Rainier.
Yeah.
A lovely site, beautiful site. We were blessed with Dundalk, very big. I mean, 12.5 acres. Things like the rates are €475,000 a year, so that would intimidate you. Plus the fact that a lot of empty buildings, which ultimately have to be maintained, or something done with them. Now, as happens, we only used the first way of doing it. I didn't have to adapt the early stage. Distilling is brewing with a bit on the end. So our grain intake is exactly as it was. Our mash, the grain whiskey, the malt whiskey, I should say, uses the existing mills, uses the existing mash tun and lauter tun. Yeah. The fermenters were not originally fermenters, they were tanks. The huge fermenters are too big for us. So we adapted 5 grain fermenters, 5 malt fermenters. We've subsequently added 2 more and have to add another couple to that. I still have about 5 million litres of fermentation capacity unused. And that would be 12 and 11, 23 very large fermenters. I'm not sure I'm going to live long enough to go into those. So that was there. What we had to do is spend money on putting in the columns, which were frilly. We had to put a fair bit of money into, well, massive amount of piping and things. So far, we've invested up to now, about 20 million. But at the beginning, it was about 11 or 12 million, which is cheap for a grain distillery of that size.
But I was looking at the figures of last year. The financial figures were very positive last year.
Again, thank you, God. The plan was to make whiskey for other people. Yeah. And then the plan changed to make good whiskey for other people. Yeah. We originally thought we'd have about 20 customers maximum. And they would be, ideally the ones that were the bigger pot stills that needed backup grain to supply them. For instance, Teeling was always going to be the biggest customer for us, we thought. Yeah. We now have about 135 active customers, which is causing us awful problems because we have a tiny organization. We had 26, we've had to grow to 40 now because we only make whiskey. It's computer controlled. Now we put it into casks. That's where the workers are. Putting it, because it's kind of a manual, you saw it yourself. So, and we've also adapted the products we make. Original plan was to make new fill that we'd sell on contract and then try and get through for 3 to 4 years and sell mature whiskey. That was the plan. All bulk. Yeah. What has changed is, one, the number of entrants that want to have their own brand. So buyers own label. Yeah. Not retail own label. Yeah. These are companies generally in the US that buy bulk whiskey that they want to put their own label on. There's now 700 brands of Irish whiskey. Can you believe that? Oh, I can't believe it. There used to be 5. And some of them are growing into substantial customers, small acorns, which are growing much faster than an oak tree, thank you, God. And some of the multinationals come into the country, like Roe & Co. with a pots. Yeah. It can't be a secret where they're getting their grain from. Yeah. Like Slane.
I mean, substantially, you have one competitor in the form of West Cork distillers. Would that be right to say? That can match the volumes?
I'm not sure that West Cork, well, Cooley did, because they made a aims of selling their mature and things like that. They started to sell new fill, some new fill and some mature. They were selling mature. I think that's largely stopped now. Not fully, I think, because they cut back production dramatically, which is a shame. Yeah. John O'Connell has done a brilliant job in West Cork. He's beyond innovative. He makes me look like a complete laggard. But he is making so much money from this malted beverage and from White Claw.
Right.
He
Okay.
makes all the White Claw that I'm not so sure how much he is into the own label grain and malt.
Yeah.
Not sure. Now he's very successful as well and doing a good job. But remember, Grants have established a big operation that
Yeah.
in time could become bigger than us. Could be. They're probably about slightly smaller than us at the moment. And Royal Oak in Carlow is putting in the third column. I think they've changed the three columns. They're putting in Philly columns as we speak. So they will be
Okay.
selling. They will be selling new fill as well.
Okay. So they're going to change their model. So as a brand, you brought out Burke's, and then you brought out some uh, own label, very very limited numbers of Great Northern Distillery whiskey as well.
Oh well, no, they were gifts.
They were
We
only for gifts.
didn't
Yeah.
sell them.
Okay.
Burke's, as I said, everybody, almost every company that is in the business at the moment, all 130 of them, of
Yeah.
which 40 are distilleries, are focusing on the US.
Yeah.
To me, the future of Irish whiskey is Eastern Europe, followed by Asia, followed by Africa. That's the way it's going to go over the next 25 years. And I
I
don't
know
know
you've
where,
mentioned India a few times as well
yeah,
in discussions you've had.
yes.
Do you really see that as being a good opportunity for us?
Oh, massive if you can get there. Massive, beyond big. I mean, India's 300 million cases of whiskey at the moment. Irish whiskey is 12.
Yeah.
Scotch is 110 or 20, say.
Yeah.
Now, it's mainly Indian whiskey, but some of it is very good.
Yeah.
Some of it is made in traditional Scotch ways, but even the stuff that will be made with the, say, sugar-based Indian whiskey is not that bad. Is it John Paul is the very successful?
John Paul is probably
A very good whiskey.
well best known, but a lot of the local would be just
Awful.
molasses based.
Predominantly, but there's no reason why you can't make good whiskey out of alcohol.
Yeah.
It's just that make it out of grain is because that's how Scotch and Irish and American is made. But it's very difficult to get into it. It's a cheap market because of that. But as the middle class grows, they will be doing it. I think it's possibly going to be an easier market than China.
Yes. Yeah.
But there again, if you look at, never mind, look at Thailand, 120 million cases of whiskey sold in Thailand. 120 million, mainly Indian,
Yeah.
cheap. But there's a market. Where would you get 120 million cases of whiskey? In any other, all the markets combined. And if you look at what's happened this year, and maybe take last year, this year is so awkward. Eastern Europe is going to be 2 million cases out of 12 million cases. So it's
I mean,
very
Russia has become big.
huge.
Russia has taken off. Yeah.
Huge. And some of the other stands, Poland is developing rapidly, even in the last few months of the bad times. They're moving into it. If you look at Africa, South Africa was 5,000 cases a year when I looked
That's
at it in
huge now. Yeah.
1996. It's going to be what, the second or third biggest this year? Well, it won't be now. It was last year. There's complete lockdown there.
Yeah.
Nigeria is going to grow dramatically. West Africa will grow. So that'll be a big market. I've left out Latin America because I don't understand it yet, but it should be big. It was traditionally a very big market for Irish whiskey.
I think we have Juan here from Argentina. He's actually on earlier.
Oh.
He was asking, and he was asking for your sons as well, and talking about Teeling. He's a big fan.
Oh,
but
good.
yeah, so people from all over. Did you ever, or what did you not foresee, John? I mean, obviously you couldn't have foreseen the massive growth that there has been, but was there anything in particular that you didn't see in the market that you wish you had done, that maybe you would have done it slightly different?
What do you mean? Are the things I would have done slightly different? Of course there are. Anybody would tell you. Do I enjoy the mistakes I made? No. Did I make some awful mistakes? Yes. Would I have changed how we would have developed it? The original plan was to make whiskies that people would drink. We did not realize the difficulties of route to market or rotation. That's getting it off the shelves when you get it on the shelves. I don't think, and I suspect that most of the new Irish distilleries don't realize that either.
Yeah.
You might have heard me say this before. It's very difficult to get your product on the shelf.
Yeah.
And in the bars, particularly the developed markets where you have bar whiskies, unless you can keep it in front on the front of the bar.
Yeah.
What'll happen is you're there for the first drink, and the next time the barman bars, he brings it out and puts it in front of you. You have no visibility, which is why we focused on the off trade rather than the on trade. Whereas Jack and Steve and Teeling focuses in the on trade.
Yeah. Well, that's a huge challenge, obviously,
yeah, if you
and very
develop,
competitive.
yeah, well, if you develop your brand in the on trade, it's a sustained brand. Whereas if you're in the off licenses and in the off trade, it's price and you're renting shelf space, and it's very, very difficult. But good companies to work with. But still, you're only as good as the last order you got from them if you don't develop any loyalty or anything like that. So
there's a question here asking, would you do pot still in Great Northern?
we are doing pot still. We make a full range of whiskies. We make on the columns we make double and triple distilled. And again, as recently as 3 or 4 hours ago, we're kind of saying, sorry. Did I say the pots we make? And in the pots we make double, triple, peated,
yeah,
and pot. And we're having to reduce the amount of triple distilled we're making this year because of the demand, would you believe, for double distilled, more flavour, and for pot and peated.
I have to say, there's been some outstanding peated new make and whiskey out of your distilleries. I'm really encouraged to see.
I mean, again,
coming back.
Some of the stuff, the original Connemara would make your ears curl.
Yeah.
I mean, very high, the Lafroy type stuff, and then that was reduced. And yet, the likes of David Hines, we won some award for the 12-year-old Connemara, and he was with me and he says, "I don't like that." I said, "What do you mean I don't like it?" He says, "The 12-year-old is getting the vanilla flavour out of the casks rather than the peat." He preferred the 5-year-old Connemara because that was a peated malt. So yes, there's experience going into it. Again, I give great credit to Brian Watts for working on that. The guy is working like 180 hours a week. In a way, the pandemic was good because he couldn't go home to his wife for 4 months, and he worked every Saturday. I mean, I hope he's not listening. He worked. We have a large number of blends because what we're trying to do, we've been experimenting with all kinds of levels of peated, and we're short of peated. Pot still, we do, I think we're 50-50, like a number of them. Where we've been doing the experimentations up there, not me, Brian, is in the woods and in the ages that you can change it. So we have to try and give every customer something different, which is what you're trying to do.
Which on the cask, somebody asked, what is the craziest cask experiment that you've considered, or can you say?
Yes, I can say. A fella who came to me, and I have no idea how this works, and he said he wanted 1,000 liters. I said fine, and he says I'm a carpenter. I'm making my own casks. That's fine. He was making casks from apple trees.
Wow. Okay.
Now apparently, the apple wood is quite acidic, and it may not mature well. Now, there are guys out there who are going to come in and shout at you and me. I don't know. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made was I bought the assets of Adam Miller's and Son, which used to have Glen Erin and Miller's Irish whiskey in Thomas Street. I bought the working capital assets, and other than the building. And in it, there were these magnificent cherrywood vats. Magnificent.
Yeah.
Rather than I got them broken up. They were 19th century cherrywood vats. Can you imagine the flavors you would get out of those now? Cherrywood was a very big in Ireland, believe it or not. I think in the 18th, again, Charlie will tell you there, in the 18th and 19th century, cherrywood was used a lot to mature spirits. Yeah. It was a big part of Irish whiskey. So we're varying the casks now. Alex Chasko is at least as innovative as Brian is in Teeling, and they're doing a fabulous job with their stuff too. But that's where the future lies. I think that you make whiskies, as I said to you, that people want, and as their palate becomes experienced with, say, a standard whiskey, which 60% of them are going to be a Jameson to start or more, then they might want to vary it a little bit, and it's up to all these new distilleries and new brands to cater to that demand. What does Jack call it? The ladder of opportunity.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we were
so much better than Scotch. We were so much better than Scotch at this. Scotch are hung up on. Scotch are making the same mistake as the Dublin distillers did in the 1860s and 70s. We know how to make good whiskey. Anybody who says differently doesn't know what they're talking about, except the customer doesn't buy that product.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as you said, to be supplying for 140 different companies, it's phenomenal. But one of the big ones you do supply for is this one here. So you might recognize these two characters.
Yeah, you know what? Some of the things that they do are so strange to me. If they didn't look like me, I'd wonder who the father was.
Well, they were celebrating their 5-year anniversary, and
Oh
obviously
yeah,
a huge.
they're very proud of them. They've done a fantastic job.
What were they like growing up, John? Were they very different? Were they similar? Did they fight? Did they kill each other? Were they competitive?
Yes. Yes. Now they have an older sister.
Yeah, man, yeah.
Who is the bat lady? She's the bat specialist, and she beat them all up as she tried. Stephen is very much the peacemaker. But what I'm really very proud of, I have to say, is that they're both turned out to be very good business people, really good. And for anybody with kids, you're very grateful if they're well. That's all you want. You just want them to be healthy. If they're good, you're very pleasantly surprised. If they're very good, you say, Jesus, how did that happen? Must take after their mother or something. But these guys are very good, very decisive. They work their way well. I think they know what they're doing. They paddle their own canoe. They don't look, or I would suspect, take advice. And this vision that you see there in front of you is Jack's shared with Stephen, that they will do a branded Irish whiskey based in the home of whiskey, which was in Dublin. That was his, and it's a very clear mission.
Yes. Do they ever come to you for advice, John?
Pardon?
Do they ever come to you for advice?
Not really.
Yeah.
No. I mean, we would discuss certain things, but they, in terms of the products or like that, they don't ask at all. It's a different model. There's branded purely and premium brand, and they don't need my advice. Now, I'm available, of course, and you would discuss certain things, but not on the strategy of their company. It's they know they're focused on the US and they're focused on travel retail. Bad markets at the moment. What can you do?
I mean, one of the things, John, that I mean, obviously you're a hugely successful businessman, but you're also a very strong family man. I mean, I see you in there, in the distillery with your children, your grandchildren, with Deirdre. You were going religiously every weekend in there. What do you do?
Twice a week, would you believe?
Well, or were you?
It's now twice a week.
You're going twice a week now, okay.
Well, that's you have to say that's the mother. Right. Deirdre wants to go to support her sons in bad times.
Yeah. Oh, Deirdre's great. She's always there supporting you as well. And
and
somebody has to drink.
Well, we met in, I think some of you might know this, I met her in the 3rd of January 1964. So that's 57 years ago. We're married 49 years.
Okay.
She's from a mile away here. She's north side.
You keep everything local, John.
Bloody sure. Yeah. Oh no, Jack broke the rule. Emma married a guy from 200 yards away. Jack married a girl from the south side of the city.
Oh.
Then Stephen went mad entirely. He married a girl from London.
Yeah.
But they had to bring them to Clontarf. As you know, we all live within 400 yards of each other.
Yeah.
But
that's fabulous to share the success, John.
Not so much. The idea was when I went to America all those years ago, I didn't really like the fact that people leave home at 18 and you never see them again, really. The kids, when they go off and they paddle their own canoes and things like that, if they go home, it might be at Thanksgiving. I didn't want that.
Yes.
And I wanted to come back to Clontarf. I never wanted to work anywhere else. I never wanted to live anywhere else other than the north side of the city. No, though I was working out in Belfield. And I was lucky enough to do that, and lucky enough to persuade the 3 kids. Emma works in Belfield, and she lives in the old family home in Clontarf.
Okay.
So and that's a terrible commute now to Belfield. Yeah. But it's very good. The support, it should be there. Bringing in kids, I think, is a very good idea. I think you should do that to let them see what their parents do. I think it's a great idea to expose them to things like that. And I will tell you the why of this. I've never forgotten it. I won't use names. When I was in New York in 1971 or 72, there was a guy doing the MBA at Columbia, and we were sitting in the Golden Rail. which was a bar one night, and we were talking about entrepreneurs and enterprise. He says, my father was strongly entrepreneurial, and he was in a business. He was in the building business and the contracting business, and he said it was a big company. And he said every so often we would say the rosary every night, which is very Irish. And he says sometimes my mother would say, "No, kids, we're going to say a decade of the rosary so that Daddy will have the money to pay the wages on Friday." There's nothing better to learn about business than that.
Yeah.
And they all have to participate. This is not a civil servant's job. It's not a bureaucrat's job. You know, you have to be out there and to work and to earn your wages. So you know what Jack and Stephen have done. Jack with the 3 girls' names on the stills, and now the 2 girls, the pots. Nobody wanted to name the big ugly pots in Dundalk, though they control it. And none of them seem to think they should have columns named after them. But anyway, they're very welcome to it if they wish. So I think it's important that the family is involved. I've got great support from Deirdre, as indeed, now I have to say, that Jack and Stephen are blessed with their wives. They're very supportive. Now, they both understand business. Both are businesswomen.
Sure. Yeah.
It's very important.
No, I noticed that about. I mean, the one thing, John, and I've experienced of this firsthand on a couple of occasions. I'll come to those actually because they strike a real chord with me. So, you're obviously a very family man. You like your sport. I know you're a big rugby fan.
Oh yeah.
And you've retired from playing now, have you?
At 68, when I got a neck injury. Now I kind of half retired as playing veterans. I was, again, very lucky. I was useless. Absolutely. Those of you who've played club rugby will know they can have a thing called the J7s, which is the 9th team. This is for fellas with one leg and one arm and who can't see and things like that. But I played on that for 20 years with a couple of other fellas who weren't any better than me. And we had the best of times. And if you have a second, I'll tell you a story about it, which I don't.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there was a match being played in Blackrock where the 3rd Bs, they were good. They were the 5ths, were playing. It was Clontarf against Blackrock. And the ref was atrocious. And the captains were complaining. Absolutely. So eventually he called the 2 of them over. Now, I heard this from the director of referees in Leinster, or whoever it is who controls the referees.
Yeah.
And he said, "Look, fellas, look. He said, why are you guys, you 2 guys, why are you playing at this level?" They said, "What do you mean? Well, why are you at this level?" Because they said, well, we're not the best rugby players in the world. He says, "Why am I refereeing at this level?" Because he wanted it. And it's absolutely true. But I enjoyed it fully. And then we took up veterans, Golden Oldies Rugby in 1993 and traveled the world with it. I was meant to be playing, would you believe, in June in Denver in over 70s. Now, this would have been worth seeing because we would have been trundling around. We wouldn't have known which end we were going for. That's a good story. Look, I had the best of fun. I was blessed. Again, you keep hearing this word, but I played rugby with Jack and Stephen on a league match. All right. Which is, so I had.
What position did you play, John?
I was a prop, so I was bigger then. But remember, I was at the 9s. So you got big fat fellas. You didn't get big strong fellas because they were any good, they went up. And then as I got older, I played hooker. And because I didn't have to be pushing as much and bursting blood vessels and doing so. But I have multiple injuries from all those years of playing rugby. Multiple knees, shoulders, neck, fingers.
Did you beat Blackrock? That's the big thing.
Not often.
Yeah.
Not often. They were a great club. They've gone down. So it's a pity. But the camaraderie at that level, all of us were happy just to be playing. Yeah. You know, we weren't.
What did you do to unwind, John?
I played rugby.
That was your relaxation?
I played cricket in the summer. And the reason I played cricket was, it wouldn't be familiar in my family, but my father wasn't that well. He didn't have a good heart and he couldn't play hurling. And so he took up hockey and cricket in Clontarf. And Clontarf rugby and cricket clubs are in the same ground. So I played cricket there till the same age. Again, useless as well. I played on the 6th. And I used to be picked on that because I had the big cars. I could bring the schoolboys who had no cars to get to the night. That's the truth. Did I care? Not at all.
I just want to recount a couple of stories because I am very grateful to a number of things you've done. And I think it's a testament to how approachable and how down to earth you are, despite your success and maybe because of it. So I think you remember last year I came with a guest, a friend of mine from France, and we wanted to catch a distillery tour in Teeling. And I think we arrived at 5 past 5 and the last tour had gone. So we decided we'd go up and have a look in the shop, and we bumped into yourself and Deirdre. And I don't remember if you gave us the personal tour of the distillery yourself with that French lady that I was with at the time.
Lucky man. But why wouldn't I? I mean, just think for a minute. What happened out of that? The job of the distillery and my job and Jack and Stephen's job is to send out ambassadors.
Yeah.
And I'm a huge believer, and that's why Deirdre comes in as well. She talks to the people.
Yeah.
If they leave Dublin and they talk about it like you're talking about it,
yeah,
that's what you want. And storytelling is the great way to get success. So I'm delighted with that. I would do, but plus the fact I like the whiskey business. You know, it's interesting.
But I still like the personal touch. It's something that will, it's a nice way of being friendly and doing business as well. But I really appreciated that. So I wanted to.
You didn't have to, because that was off my nose. I was delighted to do that. You know that.
Yeah, I know you enjoyed it as well. That's what it made it even more. Made it even more exciting was the fact that you enjoyed it. And then the other thing that nobody else ever did, John. I'm going to embarrass you now, because I think it was after we did issue 3 of the magazine. We had done the brand ambassadors, and I was just really pleasantly surprised. You sent me an email saying how great the magazine was, how great the articles were in that particular issue. And it's something that's really stuck with me. I mean, it's 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago now, but it's something that I publicly want to thank you for. But it was a very nice touch, out of the blue to get an email like that was very encouraging.
Which is the purpose.
Yeah.
Now you've got it right. I mean, people need, and whether they're coaching the under 8s. Or whether it's with the distilling team in Teeling, or the distilling team up in Great Northern, or the guys filling the casks, they should be encouraged. They need to be encouraged, which is the reason. Just say, guys, you're doing a good job. But you
lead by example, and you talk the walk, or you walk the talk. It's not just
but there's no harm to do that. I don't see that as a problem. And in just to use that in terms of this close down, we didn't close down at all in Great Northern. Now, we changed a bit to sanitizer, and that wasn't to gain anything out of it, please. We didn't really want to, because we were using grain whiskey for the sanitizer. But there was a big problem, as you know, in Louth. The hospitals had no sanitizer, the homes had no sanitizer, and things like that. And there was a bit of griping the first day or two from the management, not the workers, about were we at risk coming in and this kind of stuff. So we plowed on. And an amazing to me, we've had no absenteeism at all since March. Nobody's sick. And I think they're afraid to be sick. No, that's not fair. Ask me to understand this, and I don't after all these years. Productivity went up. So while we were making the sanitizer, at one stage we were making 40,000 litres, about 300,000 or 400,000 little bottles a week. We're not making that now because it's coming in from abroad. We actually lost no whiskey production, because through one way or the other, production expanded to make up that.
Well, I suppose people are appreciative that they didn't lose their jobs as well, John.
If you think about it, I heard somebody say that because they got a bonus which they more than earned. They kind of said, we're lucky to have our jobs. I hadn't thought about that. Maybe you're right. Maybe they did think in this day and age. But even at my stage, it was amazing to be surprised. I'm still at my age to be surprised at this. Is that it's a kind of a machine-led productivity, as you know. I mean, everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And yet we were making maybe 40,000 litres a week. Now that's most Irish distillers aren't that extra from the existing inputs. So what was happening was the actual yield was going up. Lovely experience. So we ended up benefiting from it.
Well, we don't want to keep the COVID virus around for too much longer.
I told you we're not doing that much of it now.
But John, you are a legend. You really
great. I love that
and people will agree. That's the thing. You transformed the business. You've been encouraging to a lot of new businesses. People find you highly approachable to be able to go and do business with. The amount of products that are available now is very largely down to you. You've been a great ambassador for Irish whiskey and business. And I think Brand Ireland as well has really benefited hugely from your experience and your wisdom. So I just wanted to thank you. Thank you for coming on the show. You're a gentleman. And we hope we'll meet up soon again.
Well, it's been a pleasure. I hope you've gathered I've thoroughly enjoyed it. So thank you, and thank anybody who's been listening, and the best of luck. We'll see you.
All right, John. Thank you very
Thanks
much.
very much. Good night, everybody. All the best.
Good night, John.
Bye-bye.
God bless. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Wow. Well, I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. Such a gentleman and a great entrepreneur and ambassador for Irish whiskey. He's really made a huge impact on the Irish whiskey market, and we thank him. So just to finish up, thank you for staying so long. We'd love you to support us by maybe subscribing to our channel on YouTube if you can, and following us, and delighted to have you on the show. If there's any questions you'd like to ask, or would like to have any particular guests coming up in the future, please let us know. The show is your show, it's for yourselves. If you would like to support the magazine, that would be great. But the show is basically to show authentic insights, and I don't think you get a more authentic interview than that one. So thank you very much. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week. We'll be announcing the guests for next week. That should be very exciting as well. Any comments, please leave them on the channel, and if you think of anything we can improve, please do. Thanks very much. Stay safe. Good evening.